Maple Ridge Drive is the kind of road that makes you believe nothing bad has ever happened here. Old colonial revival-style houses stand quietly behind ancient oak trees, their red brick walls, white shutters, and meticulously manicured lawns. The afternoon drags on slowly, the sunlight slanting gently across the road, the wind rustling the leaves. Somewhere down the street, the rhythmic hum of a lawnmower echoes, so familiar it almost blends into the air. House number 214 has stood there for over 6 decades. 63 years of summers, winters, children's laughter, and quiet evenings. To outsiders, it's just a beautiful house in an old neighborhood. But to the woman who lives inside, it represents a lifetime built day by day, year by year, in quiet and stability. That afternoon was unremarkable. No sirens, no patrol cars, no sign of trouble. Just a peaceful afternoon, like hundreds of other afternoons before. The woman stepped out of the house in her simple home clothes, a gray t-shirt and black sweatpants. Her reading glasses were pushed up to her forehead. She walked barefoot on the warm concrete path in the sunlight, so familiar that she didn't need to look down. She pointed to the letter. It was a small, insignificant matter, so unremarkable that no one would have thought it could be the start of a chain of events that would shake the entire state's legal system. She stood before the mailbox, opened the lid, and took out a few envelopes and a magazine. Everything was slow, peaceful, completely harmless. And it is in that ordinary moment when a woman stands before her house, on her land, in a neighborhood where she has lived for nearly 2 decades, that the wheels of tragedy begin to turn. At the beginning of the road, a patrol car just appeared. No one on Maple Ridge Drive knew that the woman standing by the mailbox was one of the most powerful figures in the state's justice system. No bodyguards, no chauffeur, no judge's robes or formalities. Just a middle-aged black woman in casual clothes, enjoying a rare afternoon free from stressful court proceedings or hearings. For the past 20 years, Olivia Calder has sat on the Supreme Court bench. Her rulings are studied in law schools, and her critical opinions are cited in appeals cases across the country. She is known for her meticulousness, sharpness, and, in particular, her uncompromising stance against any form of abuse of power. She once ruled that large corporations were responsible for environmental pollution. She defended the right to a fair trial for defendants overlooked by the system. And on many occasions, she signed decisions harshly criticizing police departments when they overstepped the boundaries of the law, believing that their badges gave them the right to be above the law. Prosecutors respected her impartiality. Defense lawyers admired the precision of her arguments. Other judges sought her advice on how to interpret the Constitution. In legal circles, the name Olivia Calder carried an unmistakable weight. But on this quiet street, on that Tuesday afternoon, all of that was invisible. Nothing in her ordinary appearance suggested she was the woman who had once changed the legal precedents of an entire state. Nothing in the way she held the letter suggested she was the woman who had issued rulings that stripped abusive officers of their badges. And it was that very invisibility, the contrast between real power and ordinary appearance, that made her the perfect target for a deadly misjudgment, because, to the person about to walk down the aisle, she wasn't a judge. She was just a black woman who didn't seem to belong here. The patrol car appeared at the top of Maple Ridge Drive quietly, almost unnoticed. It rolled slowly along the tree-lined road, as if the driver were observing, assessing, searching for something that didn't belong there. Then, suddenly, the car accelerated. The brakes screeched a short, sharp sound as it stopped right in front of house number 214. The car door swung open before the engine had even completely shut off. Officer Ryan Mercer stepped out, 31 years old, 4 years in the force, tall, broad-shouldered. His eyes held a mixture of vigilance and the self-confidence of someone who believed he was in control. His record included 2 previous complaints, both concerning tense confrontations with black residents in affluent neighborhoods. Both dismissed. No disciplinary action, no consequences. Mercer's hand immediately rested on the gun at his holster. He didn't draw it. There was no need to. That gesture alone was enough to send the message, "I am in charge here." He walked up the path leading into the house, his strides long and decisive, as if entering a space where he had complete control. No questions, no greetings, no introductions. Olivia Calder returned from the mailbox, several envelopes still in her hand. She watched the man approaching her, her gaze shifting from surprise to caution. This wasn't the first time she'd seen that gait, that confidence. She'd seen it in body cam videos shown in court, in the testimony of officers who believed the badges allowed them to order first, think later. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. "Get out the door," Mercer replied immediately. No explanation, no context, just a stark command, given with the expectation of unconditional obedience. Olivia didn't move. She stood still, on her own path, in front of the house where she had lived for nearly 20 years. "For what reason?" she asked. "Why are you on my property?" Mercer continued to advance, closing the gap between them. The afternoon air remained eerily quiet, as if the entire neighborhood were holding its breath. And in that silence, a confrontation had officially begun. "We received a call," Mercer said, his voice even but firm, as if that answer alone was enough to end any further questions. "A call about what?" Olivia asked immediately. She didn't back down, still standing in her lane, in front of the familiar red brick wall of the house she had lived in for nearly 2 decades. Mercer didn't answer directly. He simply took another step closer, close enough for his shadow to fall over the woman holding the letter. "You need to stay away from the doorway," he said. "Come back. Now." The voice lacked any commanding tone. It was the voice of someone accustomed to giving orders and expecting immediate obedience. Olivia Calder looked him straight in the eye. "You are giving me orders without a search warrant, without reasonable grounds, and without stating any valid reason," she said, slowly and clearly. "You have no authority to do so." Mercer tilted his head, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "I don't need to explain," he replied. "And to be clear, you are not permitted to leave now." That statement changed the atmosphere. No leaving allowed. That was no longer a routine check. It was detention. "Are you holding me captive?" Olivia asked, her voice still calm but sharper. "On my own property?" Mercer didn't answer the question. He glanced around the house, across the front yard, as if searching for a reason to justify his presence. Then he uttered a sentence that would later be repeated on every national news broadcast. "She doesn't seem like someone who belongs around here." Those words fell onto the concrete pavement like a heavy weight. The sound of the lawnmower at the end of the street continued steadily. The afternoon sun was still warm. But in that moment, everything had changed. Olivia Calder wasn't surprised. She'd heard similar statements before in testimony, in records, in video footage shown in courtrooms. She knew exactly what they meant. "I've lived here for 17 years, she said. "And I'm asking you to leave my property before you make this situation worse for yourself." Mercer clenched his jaw. He didn't turn away. On the contrary, his hand began to move toward the handcuffs. And at that moment, this encounter officially crossed the line of words. "I'll leave when I'm sure you're allowed to be here," Mercer said, his voice low and cold. His hand reached for the handcuffs, his fingers closing around the familiar metal as if by reflex. Olivia Calder looked directly at him. She didn't flinch, she didn't raise her hands, she didn't show any fear. "You have no authority to decide whether I'm allowed to be in my own home," she replied. "You have no reasonable suspicion of any crime." Mercer snorted, a short, contemptuous sound. "This isn't a debate," he said. "Turn around and put your hands on the wall." "No," Olivia replied. "Just one word, short, definitive." In that moment, the only thing Mercer heard was not legal logic or civil rights, but defiance. To him, the refusal was not a defense of legitimate rights, but an act of disobedience, the excuse he had been waiting for. "That's not a request," Mercer said, raising her voice. "And you're obstructing official duties." "This is not a lawful detention," Olivia said. "You have no legitimate grounds, no valid reason, and no consent from me to be on this property. Everything you are doing right now is being recorded by your own camera." The camera mounted on Mercer's chest continued to run, recording every second. The woman stood in her home clothes, the letter still in her hand. Her voice was steady, not trembling. There were no signs of violent resistance, no threats, and one police officer, his face tense with anger because his authority had not been obeyed for the first time that day. Mercer took a deep breath. His shoulders tensed. He took another step forward, the distance between them now less than an arm's length. "You're only making things worse," he said. Olivia Calder didn't move. She stood on her front porch, facing a man seeking a reason to turn her legitimate existence into a crime. And in that moment, the brief silence between them wasn't a truce, it was the calm before violence. Ryan Mercer couldn't wait any longer. The feigned patience he'd displayed since the beginning of the encounter had completely vanished. In his mind, this situation was no longer a test, but a confrontation that had to end with submission. He reached out and grabbed Olivia Calder's wrist. The grip was so sudden and forceful that she froze for a split second. Immediately, Mercer spun her toward the brick wall of the house. Her back slammed against the rough surface. The envelopes fell from her hands, scattering across the concrete floor, a magazine sliding toward the walkway. The body cam shook violently as Mercer closed in. His breathing became rapid and heavy. The recording captured the screeching of shoes on the ground and the clanging of metal as handcuffs were pulled out. "She's being arrested," Mercer said, his voice strained. "For trespassing and resisting arrest. Treason," Olivia said, her voice pressed against the wall but still clear. "On my property." Mercer didn't answer. He pulled her hands behind her back and tightened the handcuffs. Too tight. The cold metal dug deep into her wrists, leaving red marks on her skin in just seconds. Olivia didn't struggle. She didn't scream. She didn't resist. She kept her hands open, moving slowly, carefully, exactly as she had seen in hundreds of videos she'd watched in the judge's chair, videos of people being treated brutally simply for not bowing quickly enough. "You're making a serious mistake," she said, her voice low but still controlled. "Everything you're doing is being recorded." "Shut up," Mercer growled. Then he leaned down, close to her ear, close enough that only she could hear. And in that instant, he whispered a single word, just one word. So softly, it was almost lost in the wind and the sound of the lawnmowers down the street. But the bodycam's microphone is designed to not miss any confessions. It recorded that word with undeniable clarity. Olivia Calder closed her eyes for a brief second. When she opened them, her expression had completely changed. Her usual composure had vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper, a look that the police officers who had stood before her in court would instantly recognize. "This confrontation has just entered a phase of no return. Officer," Olivia Calder said, her voice no louder than before, but the rhythm had changed. It was no longer the voice of a citizen being treated unjustly. It was the voice of someone accustomed to controlling the courtroom with a single word. "I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say." She slowly turned her head, careful not to make any movement that could be interpreted as resistance. Her gaze was fixed on the flashing bodycam lens on Mercer's chest, as if she knew exactly where history was being recorded. "Recording for record-keeping," she said clearly, each word pronounced precisely, with the standard of someone accustomed to having their words transcribed word for word. "I am Judge Olivia Calder, Supreme Court of the State. The air is freezing." For a moment so brief it was almost non-existent, all sound seemed to vanish. The wind, the lawnmower, all receded, giving way to the heavy silence of a sudden awareness. "I am standing on my property," Olivia continued. "I have lived here for 17 years. You have no warrant. There is no reasonable doubt. There is no legal basis to approach, detain, or touch me." She paused, long enough for each accusation to soak into the air. "You trespassed. You assaulted. You made an unlawful arrest, and you used racist language while detaining a sitting Supreme Court justice." Mercer's hand, which had been gripping her wrist, loosened almost uncontrollably. His breathing became rapid, no longer steady. The confidence that had led him down this path crumbled in those brief seconds. "You're ruining your own career," Olivia said, her voice devoid of threat, just a stark truth. And every second you keep me in this situation will only make the consequences worse. Mercer recoiled half a step, as if the ground beneath his feet had suddenly become unstable. His eyes darted around, searching for a way out of the situation that had spiraled out of control. I need to see the papers," he stammered. "You need to take my handcuffs off. Right now," Olivia replied. "Before this becomes a federal case, from which you'll never get away." It was a moment when power completely shifted. No shouting, no movement. Just the truth, spoken at the right time, in front of a camera that doesn't lie. Ryan Mercer froze, as if his brain were trying to process a reality he had never considered. The woman he had just pinned against the wall, handcuffed and insulted with a whispered word, was now a Supreme Court justice. Not someone he could ignore, not an unfamiliar name, one of the most powerful legal figures in the system he served. I don't know," he said, his voice weakening. "That's the problem," Olivia Calder replied, without raising her voice. "You don't know, you don't ask, you don't investigate. You just see a black woman in an affluent neighborhood and conclude that she doesn't belong there." Mercer reached for the handcuffs with trembling hands. The metal clanged softly against the metal, producing a small but resonant sound in the heavy silence. He fumbled for a few seconds before finally unlocking them. When the handcuffs came free, they fell to the concrete floor with a sharp, cold click. Olivia slowly rubbed her wrist, unhurriedly. Red marks were beginning to appear, undeniable evidence of being forcibly assaulted. She deliberately kept her hand within the body camera's view, allowing the camera to capture every detail. Then she pulled a thin leather purse from her trouser pocket. She opened it with a decisive, familiar motion. The gold seal of the state Supreme Court gleamed in the afternoon sun. The lettering was clear and unmistakable. State Supreme Court Justice. Mercer recoiled. His face was visibly pale. The confident stride he had made onto the front porch had vanished completely. Before him was no longer the suspicious woman, but the very embodiment of the legal system he had just publicly violated. I didn't mean. It doesn't matter," Olivia interrupted. "Intention doesn't erase the act. And your actions have been fully documented." She looked straight at him. "What's your name?" Mercer did not reply. "Number?" Still silence. Olivia nodded slightly, as if she had anticipated it. "That's fine. I'll have both within an hour, along with the training records, civil complaint history, and all the relevant reports." She bent down to pick up the fallen envelopes, her movements slow and calm. "Start thinking about your lawyer," she said. "You'll need a really good one." Meanwhile, at the end of the street, the red and green lights began to reflect off the oak trees. Support vehicles were arriving, and Ryan Mercer's downfall had only just begun. The flashing red and green lights at the top of Maple Ridge Drive shattered the street's usual quiet. 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of number 214. Doors swung open, and hurried footsteps echoed on the concrete pavement, the sound of a system that had just realized something was seriously wrong. Sergeant Patricia Vance was the first to step up the aisle. 22 years in the force. A calm demeanor, a familiar gaze that assessed the scene in seconds. She glanced quickly. An officer standing stiffly, his face pale. A woman rubbing her wrists with distinct red marks, and a body cam still flashing. "What's going on here?" Vance asked. Before Mercer could open her mouth, Olivia Calder spoke. Her voice was devoid of emotion, only carrying the cold precision of a legal record. "Your officer approached me without justification, detained me on private property, used force, handcuffed me without legal reason, and used racist language. All of this was recorded on body cam." Vance paused for a very brief moment, just long enough to recognize the gravity of the situation. Her gaze shifted to Mercer. "Is that correct, officer?" Mercer didn't answer. He looked down at the ground. Olivia continued, leaving no room for cover-up. "I am Judge Olivia Calder, Supreme Court of the state. This is my home. I request that all video footage be preserved, that a report of the scene be filed now, and that this officer be suspended pending investigation. Sergeant Vance took a deep breath. "Madam, I apologize for—" "I don't need an apology," Olivia interrupted. "I need accountability, and I need it right now." Vance nodded, turned, and made a phone call. Within minutes, the chain of command was triggered. Internal communication was established. Body cam data was marked as secure. Mercer was instructed to surrender his weapon and step aside. Neighbors began gathering on their porches. Familiar faces, people who had greeted Olivia for years, now stood silently watching the police swarm their peaceful street. No one said anything. There was no need to say anything. In less than 30 minutes, an ordinary afternoon had transformed into an event that the entire city would have to contend with. And for Ryan Mercer, this was the moment he realized things had spiraled out of control, not just his, but an entire system that had just been forced to look in the mirror. An internal investigation was launched that very evening. Not the usual weeks-long process, but with the highest priority. The reason was clear. The victim was not just a citizen, but a Supreme Court justice, and the entire incident had been documented from beginning to end. Within 72 hours, what had been called an ambiguous situation had completely collapsed. The dispatch center confirmed that no calls had been recorded relating to Maple Ridge Drive that day. No neighbor reports, no complaints. No official reason for Ryan Mercer's presence in front of house number 214. He acted on his own initiative. Mercer's incident report, submitted 3 hours after the encounter, painted a completely different story. He described an uncooperative, aggressive, suspicious individual, forcing him to intervene to ensure area safety. But the body cam told a different story, a cold, clear, and undeniably compelling one. A woman stood in front of her house, holding a letter. No threats, no attacks, no resistance. Just questions. Just requests for her legitimate rights. The sound engineers isolated the most crucial part of the audio. That whispered word. A single word. Enough to establish the motive. Enough to transform an abuse of power into a serious human rights violation. Less than a week later, the Federal Department of Justice officially launched an investigation into the alleged deprivation of civil rights under the guise of law enforcement. The city convened its legal team in a closed-door meeting room on the top floor of the administrative building. They watched the footage 4 times in a row. No one said a word. They didn't need to imagine what would happen if this video were shown to a jury. They had seen it with their own eyes, and they understood that, from that moment on, this matter was no longer under the control of a police department. It had become a legal earthquake about to erupt. 3 months later, Ryan Mercer sat in a federal courtroom in an ill-fitting suit, his hands stiffly placed on the defendant's table. The badge was gone. The gun was gone too. The only thing left was 47 minutes of body cam footage, non-negotiable evidence. The prosecution presented the charges: deprivation of civil rights in the name of law enforcement, aggravated assault, unlawful detention, falsification of reports, and obstruction of justice. No speculation. No interpretation, only images and sound. On the second day of the trial, the video was shown to the jury. The courtroom was eerily silent. A peaceful street was visible, a woman in her home clothes. A police officer approached with his hand on his gun. Unfounded orders. Escalation. A shove. The metallic clang of handcuffs. And then that whispered word, amplified, echoed clearly in the confined space of the courtroom. No one turned away. No one spoke. On the third day, Olivia Calder stepped up to the witness stand. She wore her familiar black robe not for show, but to remind the entire room where the real power lay. Her testimony was emotionless. It was precise, sequential, and as sharp as a pre-written verdict. Every minute, every word, every action was perfectly placed, leading to an unavoidable conclusion. The defense tried to call it an unfortunate misunderstanding, a situation beyond control. They suggested that her failure to immediately identify herself contributed to the escalation. The prosecution countered with a single question: does the law require citizens to identify themselves to avoid unlawful treatment? The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was read concisely and decisively. Guilty on all charges. 4 weeks later, the judge pronounced the sentence. "You were given power and you abused it," he said. "You saw a black woman in front of your house and decided she didn't belong there." He paused. 10 years in prison. The hammer struck. Handcuffs snapped shut on Ryan Mercer's wrists exactly the same way he'd done others, and this time, no body camera could save him. The verdict closed the criminal case, but it didn't close the story. Body cam footage aired on national news channels just hours after the ruling. Legal experts analyzed every frame. Civil rights activists shared it as irrefutable proof of what they had been saying for years. Social media circulated images of a woman handcuffed in front of her own home and the truth behind it. But Olivia Calder didn't appear on interview programs. She wasn't seeking attention. 6 months later, she stood before the state legislature in her familiar black robe, not as a victim, but as someone who understood best where the system had failed. "What happened to me," she said, her voice echoing throughout the meeting room, "happens every day to people who don't have official credentials in their pockets, who don't have the status to be believed immediately. I was lucky to have a body camera recording the truth. So many people don't." The bill, named after her, was put to a vote. It included unprecedentedly harsh provisions. Interfering with or disabling body cameras would result in immediate dismissal and criminal prosecution. False reporting after the use of force would become a felony, and all civil complaints would be required to include independent footage review within 48 hours. The debate lasted for weeks. Finally, the bill was passed by an overwhelming majority. The governor signed it into law on a Tuesday afternoon, almost exactly 1 year after Olivia Calder walked out to collect her mail. She donated half of her settlement to legal aid organizations. She established a scholarship fund for law students pursuing civil rights. As for Ryan Mercer, his appeal was rejected. He served his sentence in a federal prison, far from the street where he once believed he had the absolute power to judge who belonged and who didn't. The house on Maple Ridge Drive still stands there. The red brick walls still catch the afternoon sun. The oak tree still casts its shadow on the sidewalk. Olivia Calder still goes barefoot to collect the mail on warm days, as she has done for the past 17 years. Only one thing has changed. The truth has been recorded. Power has been held accountable. And the law finally has been applied in the right place, right on our doorstep.